Hello everyone, and today I'm going to be talking about the Great Wave of Kanagawa produced by Katsushika Hokusai in 1831. So let's begin. The first time I saw the Great Wave, I was immediately drawn to its use of color. I felt that it really connected with me, but overall I just didn't know why yet. As well as color, I truly admired how the wave had been carved, so every detail was present. As we can see on the wave, every droplet of water is present. However small, all details are present. So from my first impression, I drew that the wave represented an image representing a calm and peaceful scene. But then the more research I did, I found others found the wave to be violent, some actually calling it a reckoning of nature. But to learn a bit more, let's look at the time period the wave was produced in. Now, the Great Wave itself was produced towards the end of the Edo period in Japan, and we today consider this to be the final period of traditional Japanese military rule. It was actually the man depicted on the top left here, Shogun Tokugawa Ieyasu, who started the Edo period, starting it with the belief that foreign influence was the biggest threat to Japan at the time. He especially feared religion, Christianity in particular. Mainly it would become widespread across the country and lead people away from Buddhism. But while Japan had now become separated from the rest of the world, internally it was also split into a hierarchy. Of course, with the Emperor of Japan and the Shogun at the top, then followed by samurai warriors, farmers, and then artisans and merchants at the bottom. But this would soon change, as in the mid-18th century, the city of Edo, which we can now see in the top right, was known as the largest city in the world with a population just over 1 million people. Thus, their economy had boomed. So the people of Edo, especially those farmers, artisans, and merchants, now being able to afford luxuries like books, education, and artwork. And it all gave rise to a place known as Ukiyo, meaning the floating world. Now, Ukiyo was filled with kabuki theaters, poets, writers, and actors. We can actually see a depiction here in a print of one of those kabuki theaters. All of this popularity then gave rise to a new form of art. The new form was called ukiyo-e. I have an example here in the top right. These were woodblock prints produced of these famous courtesans and kabuki actors. And if you want to think about it in a simple way, they're like posters of celebrities we have today, representing the popularity of people at the time. And it was then that a young Hokusai makes his start at the ukiyo-e art world at the age of 18. Now, like others at the time, Hokusai produced the woodblock prints of famous courtesans, which I've shown in the top row here. He would go on to have a very critically acclaimed career, but by the age of 50, he suffered a stroke after being struck by lightning. I mean, could it get any worse? But despite all the tragedy, he relearned how to draw. And today, we actually view his works from the age of 60 onwards to be his best, this including the Great Wave. We can see here on the left, this is a portrait Hokusai produced of himself at the age of 83. Hokusai himself stated, "All I have done before the age of 70, it is not worth bothering with." He believed that he would live until 110. As the older he became, the better his artwork would become. But somewhere along the line in his career, he made the switch away from the traditional prints of kabuki actors and courtesans, then focusing on working life in Japan. And to do this, he used the traditional style of Japanese landscape painting. But he felt that his style wasn't quite right. So it was then when he became intrigued by Dutch artwork from the mid-18th century, he felt his style was developing. He was mainly interested in the Dutch's use of a lower horizon, which we can definitely see present on the images on the right, opposed to the more panoramic view depicted in the traditional style. So let's come back to woodblock prints for a minute. In Japan, they were highly profitable and cheap, sold for no more than a bowl of noodles, but produced in the thousands. We actually estimate the wave itself may have been produced between 5,000 to 8,000 times. Now, while these weren't yet considered a high form of artwork, they were helping to break down a barrier, mainly that art could only be owned by the wealthy. These prints were special because anyone could own them, regardless of your class. But now, let's take a look into the process. Of course, it started with a team, a publisher commissioning an artist, of course, Hokusai. They would then paint this image onto paper, and that would then be reversed and glued down using this flat instrument we see here called the burin. Now, after it is glued down, the carver peels away at the surface of the paper, just leaving the artist's original brushstrokes on the surface of the block. Thought that was easy? Well, now they have the difficult task of recreating not only the carved image, but in a way that reflects the artist's style. For this reason, Hokusai had the best and most experienced carvers to work on his images, requiring a fine amount of detail he wasn't willing to sacrifice. Now, after the image has been carved, it's passed to a printer, who inks the woodblock in just one color, and then transfers that ink once more using the burin. So we can see in the process I've just described, this is all for one color. And we see in the Great Wave as a whole, there are around 7 to 8 of them. So every color that we see in this final print, a new woodblock would have had to be carved and inked. Bear in mind, all for just one print. Now, of course, these prints were produced in the thousands, as I said earlier, but we can see that in a later one here on the right, some of those fainter details are no longer present, and the image as a whole takes on a slight yellow tint. Now, I mentioned color earlier, and I wasn't really sure why I was drawn to it. But then that brings us to the color of Prussian blue. This darker shade of navy that we see makes up the main portion of the wave. Originally, it was invented in 1829, and what made it to different colors, made it different to other colors that had come before, is that it was more vivid, had a much greater tonal range. But what made it different is that it didn't fade over time. And thus, this made it very expensive, but by 1830, China sold it to Japan for a much cheaper price. So then Hokusai's publisher wants a way to market the color in all of his new work, and the artist Hokusai had developed a strong and profound passion in Mount Fuji. Thus, the pair embark on their most ambitious project yet, known as the 36 Views of Mount Fuji. Now let's talk about Mount Fuji for a minute. In Japan, it is sacred, as it still is today. Mount Fuji represents the core of Japanese history, its ideals, its culture, its beliefs. It's actually believed that Hokusai, and quite possibly his publisher, were a member of a religious following known as Fujiko, or in English, Fuji cults. And I don't think you need me to tell you that Mount Fuji was clearly quite personal to Hokusai. If he was willing to make 36 prints, which, bear in mind, they were produced in the thousands, we can see that he was clearly passionate. But his main focus with Mount Fuji was to depict it across various views across Japan. Here I have a couple of examples, and we can see that he aims to depict Mount Fuji from the village, the beach, the lake, and then most famously in the Great Wave, the sea. Now, using Prussian blue, the first 5 prints in the series were almost printed in entirely just that color, with slight hints of indigo and some black borders. But we can see on the right, Hokusai used his extensive knowledge of shading to depict the hours just before dawn and just after dusk, all actually made easier due to Prussian blue's much larger tonal range. So now, let's take one final look at the Great Wave. We can definitely see the color of Prussian blue making up the quantity of most of the wave. And we can even see the influence from the Dutch, with that lower horizon as the wave takes up about 2/3 of the image. Mount Fuji, as always in the prints, stands stoic and ever present in the background. But we'll come back to that a little later. Now, let's focus on the wave for a minute. The wave itself on the surface has been carved to give an imagery, claw-like in a way. Some actually believing that the wave represents a monster emerging from the sea, ready to pounce on those poor fishermen below. Now, at the time in Japan, rumors of foreign invasion started to circulate, and thus some have actually concluded the wave itself to represent those foreign influences and ideals traveling across the sea but being met at the shores of Japan with uncertainty. From that, maybe we could conclude that people are afraid, that they'll be washed away by the wave. All that was protected for centuries will now be lost. But I actually think something different. You see, I believe that the wave itself represents change. Now, with change, much like a wave, it arrives time and time again, crashing against the shore. But with it, I believe we're presented 2 options. Fighting change, like what we can see here in the wave, it's clearly a fight for life, with the fishermen in fear of the wave, or embracing change and letting the wave just wash over us. Now, I said I'd come back to Mount Fuji, As I said, it represents the core of Japanese history and is sacred. And this also brings me to my last point. Embracing change, but honoring the past. We live in an age where technology keeps advancing faster than the blink of an eye. And it's important that, yes, we evolve and we adapt to change. That's why humans have survived so long. But it's important that we do not forget our core ideals, our history, and our culture. Thank you for listening.